Welcome to the Idea Climbing Podcast. Creating and embracing your leadership promise can change your life and your business as an entrepreneur. You just need a strategy for creating it and then maintaining it over time. I discuss how to do that in this episode with my guest, Jason Hewlett. Jason has delivered thousands of presentations around the world, performed in every major casino in Las Vegas, inspired the troops in wartime Afghanistan, and authored The Promise to the One. Jason helps us embrace the promises we make to those we serve, our peers we work with, and to ourselves. We dive into topics such as the start of the leadership promise journey for entrepreneurs, the definition of a promise proclamation, and how to design yours in different areas of your life. The one thing above all else you need to do to create and embrace your leadership promise, and more golden nuggets of advice. You're going to love this show. Jason, thank you for making the time to be on the Idea Climbing Podcast. I appreciate you.
So excited to be here with you, Mark. Thanks for having me, man.
And we're going to be talking about your leadership promise, particularly in the world of entrepreneurs. But before we get into strategies, tactics, tips, things like that, when it comes to your leadership promise in quotes, how did you come across it? Why is it so important to you? What's your story there?
Oh, well, this has taken me years to actually create the language around what your leadership promise is. I've been teaching it just subliminally, I believe, for decades. But when I like to say the quote, your leadership promise is to identify, clarify, and magnify the signature moves of the people you lead. And really, I wrote a book called Signature Moves years ago. And then I've written a book called The Promise to the One, which is a promise to yourself. So this all comes together with that language to say, can I help identify the talents and the gifts of the people I lead? Can I help them clarify that that's something they need to do every day in their work? And can I help them magnify it in all that we do together? So as entrepreneurs, especially myself as a solo entrepreneur for 25 years now, hiring independent contractors, bringing people in and getting rid of them as we come and go. It's been interesting to see how often I get stuck in the minutia of doing my every single day, where I could probably spend 12 hours working on a broken printer or, and not do my signature moves, my greatness. And instead I could just hire somebody who could do it in about 5 to 10 minutes, fix it for me, spend a little extra money, but I get onto the best things that I do anyway. And so I truly believe your leadership promise is not only for yourself to identify, clarify, magnify your signature moves, but also to help others to identify and clarify and magnify theirs. I call that the ICM process.
So think back. When did the leadership promise first show up in your life? Doesn't have to be exact, but in the beginning of it, you didn't have it developed yet. Where did the leadership promise show up to you?
Oh man, that's a great question. Probably back in high school. I was the student body president of my high school. So now that you're asking me that, I've never thought of where the origination would come from, but perhaps it came from seeing people on our student body council that actually didn't follow through with the things they promised they would do. And then it all fell on me. And so I realized, okay, I'm the last one in line because leaders eat last, as Simon Sinek says, and so, or Seth Godin, whoever wrote that book. And I just would say that I would always have to be the one that picked up the slack. And so the leadership promise, I believe, came down to that: who is keeping their commitments and who's not. And what's fun to think about is that it goes all the way back to the school days, all the way into adulthood, and now into the leadership of not only leading my own company, but I lead several organizations. And yeah, when it comes down to that, it's about who makes a promise and keeps it.
That's kind of important. So where does the leadership, this sounds good so far, in the entrepreneurship world for an entrepreneur, maybe a solopreneur, co-founder, where does the leadership promise journey start? How do you get the ball rolling?
Well, I believe it comes down to your own personal accountability for the things you'll do for yourself. And so that's why I wrote the book, The Promise to the One, which is your promise to yourself. I mean, you could keep a promise to your audience, to your customers, to your employees, to the independent contractors. But if you aren't waking up and keeping those promises that you made to yourself, then it's going to trickle down eventually, and you're going to drop the ball. And so whether it's that morning routine, the Hal Elrod, morning miracle stuff, or if we're talking about even the Gay Hendricks and the Big Leap, how do we get to that place of doing our our greatness, our zone of genius instead of just zone of excellence. I think a majority of the human race at this point is living in zone of excellence, especially if they're listening to or watching this podcast. It's like we're probably all in our zone of excellence a lot, but can we get to that zone of genius? And so I think that comes down to keeping promises. I like to say, why set a goal when you can make a promise? And it's not to say goals aren't important, because of course they are. If you're an entrepreneur, you know that you have to have goals as your metrics. But if you've ever set a goal and you missed it, you just set another one. Whereas if you make a promise and break it, that's a one and done. So what are the goals that are your particulars and your promises that are proclamations? Because the particulars lead to the proclamation. So I'm going to say that a goal is a sacred promise, something that I'm going to do no matter what. And then I'm going to also say that if I set a goal and I miss it, how can I make sure that I set the right goals in the future? But what are the promises that I keep no matter what? And so I would say that that's where the leadership promise comes into play mostly.
Well, you just mentioned making a proclamation. There could be a few things behind that. What do you unpack that a little bit? What do you mean by making a proclamation within the world of promise?
Yeah, a lot of people, that's a good question. A lot of people would say like a mission statement or a proclamation of something they'll do. So when I teach this to leaders in a leadership setting, I'll say, what is your overall promise in business? Like what are you about? And how do we get to that place where we can actually say, I've got something I'm going to do no matter how the employee reacts or how the customer responds. I know that as we have a company that's a health supplement company called Cardio Miracle, and it helps with your nitric oxide in your body. It's a miracle molecule. What's challenging about this is we get all kinds of complaints from customers, whether it's the package showed up broken or, shipping was weird or we're not sure what's going on with the website. And so your promise proclamation comes down to saying, for me, is like my promise proclamation is I'm going to spread joy every single day. That's just my promise, right? So like if a customer's mad at me, how can I flip that into making sure that I keep my promise to spread joy in every interaction, even if I'm ticked off by the fact that they probably shouldn't be as mad as they are. And so that's where the promise proclamation comes in, is you just sit down and you identify for yourself, what really matters to me? How can I show up every single day by utilizing my gifts and my talents? And then coming up with a very simple phrase, spreading joy. For me, that's it. Others, it might just be, I'm fully present when I'm in a meeting instead of, hey, we could be on like a Zoom call right now and I could be looking at Facebook instead of, listening to what you're having to say. That's a real problem in terms of a promise proclamation. And so what are the different promise proclamations you could make either with your customers, with your employees, with your family at home, and with yourself?
Are those all separate ones that you do every day? Or does, in your case, spreading joy, does that bleed into your family, your clients, your, project partners, people like that? Is it a different one for each one, or do you just pick one and say spread it everywhere, or is it somewhere in between those two?
Yeah, great question too. I mean, I would love to just say that's a blanket statement for my life, right? Like I'm just going to spread joy. That is a great promise proclamation for everything that I try to do. And obviously my kids might argue otherwise. They're like, Dad, you're not always happy, right? But that doesn't just necessarily mean that. So for my children, it might be more like my promise proclamation with them is to be fully present. Whereas my promise proclamation with my customers would be that I'm going to give 100% in every engagement experience with them. And so those types of promise proclamations, I think, would be a little bit separate. When it comes to employees or independent contractors, my promise proclamation to them is to promise that they're going to utilize their signature moves. If I do their job for them, I'm breaking the promise. If they don't keep their promise to me and they don't do their job well, then that's more my fault than theirs.
So how do you keep I mean, it seems like in some respects, it sounds simple if you make it just to spread joy everywhere. It sounds simple, but I know the things that sound the simplest usually aren't the simplest. How do you prevent from breaking promises on a daily basis, especially as when you have that many proclamations to subcontractors, family, clients, business partners? Is it like a checklist? Is it something you check in with yourself every hour? How do you keep from breaking promises? Because I could imagine that could get to be a little difficult.
Yeah, that's good analysis of it. And I'd say For me personally, as I've gone through this process, I mean, I'm journaling all the time. So I'd say keeping a journal is a very important piece. Self meditation throughout the morning, especially getting up early enough so that you can keep that promise to yourself. Whether it's jumping in the cold plunge and doing all the stuff all the alpha bros talk about, or, making sure that you're just eating right, feeling good, getting some sunlight, doing some walks. I mean, uh, wherever your place lands to meditate and create your day, if it's driving in the car on your commute to your office space, what are you listening to? Is it a podcast? Are you listening to music? Or is it just silence and allowing your brain to assimilate what happened the day before? I think a lot of that comes down to just the self-reflection and getting to a good space. And then at the end of the day, you can reflect within a journal, right? Or even I like to jump in the sauna and just lay there for a half an hour and sweat it out and think, who did I break the promise to today? Oh, I was rude to that one employee, or I was short with this customer who commented something rude about me online. I mean, obviously they say don't read the comments, but I love the comments because that helps me to stay in check and in line with my promises that I've made that they expect from me. And so, yeah, there's a great self-assessment that you can do, and I'd say it comes down to journaling.
So once you get started, I would imagine it's a little bit of work to get going, but what you said, you do different things, you have journaling and other things like that that you're doing on a daily basis. And I would imagine it could also almost be like this endorphin rush of achievement, especially if it's new. Oh, I'm keeping my promises. This is great. I love it. The cold plunge, the journaling, the employees, everything is great. How do you maintain it and not just have it be an endorphin rush and then back to the status quo? What do you do to maintain it once you've achieved the initial arc?
These are cool questions, man. I mean, I would venture to guess because I haven't really gone through this process psychologically. I think these are cool questions to say that, like, yeah, I'm thinking to myself every time I achieve it, I'm congratulating myself, whether it's a check mark off the calendar or even sitting in the accomplishment. So, as a speaker and an entertainer, as I've gone on stages around the world for 25 years, I remember after a while getting a standing ovation became old hat. Now that's a weird thing to get to, right? And so I had to eventually get to the point where it was like, wow, I just got a standing ovation. I need to appreciate what just happened. So instead of going backstage and mumbling to myself like, oh, I could have done this better, I should have done that. Instead I would go backstage and I would like stop for a minute and either pray or bow my head or just think inside my mind and say, gosh, thank you for this great moment. This is amazing. What an accomplishment. I think most entrepreneurs don't do that for themselves. I think we are so push, push, go, go. What can be improved? What can be greater? That we need to just stop once in a while and be like, let me sit in the pause of what just happened, which was awesome. And that is the same as doing a podcast like with you. When we're done, obviously, I hope this goes great. And I hope your listeners are like, that was amazing. But like, I'm going to finish this. And I did not book something immediately after it. I gave myself room to breathe for the next podcast I'll be on after, because this today for me is a day I have a lot of podcast recordings. And so I'm going to sit for probably 10 or 15 minutes and just be like, Mark is a cool guy. Those are great questions. That was awesome. I feel so great about it. Like just that part, as self-affirmation as everybody's become almost averse to it because they're like, oh, that's corny. We don't do it enough. And so being grateful for that moment, I think, is the main piece. After something wonderful happens, after we've done something well, sit in it. Be glad you did it. Get off the phone call with that employee and be like, I kept my promise. That was awesome. And if you didn't, and it happens mostly with our kids, I think.
Hmm.
If you didn't keep the promise to the kid and you snapped at him or made him feel bad, okay, stop. What did I do wrong? Can I come back and fix this in some way, whether it's the apology text or fixing it the next night with some ice cream. And then we go into the next realm of feeling it's okay to break a promise. I mean, if everything's a promise, then you're really screwed too. So I'm not saying that either. It's like pick your
Okay.
promises. They've got to be the right ones.
So once you get on an even keel of keeping your promises, your proclamations, everything you just said, As far as then the people that work for you or with you, whatever capacity, how do you, I don't want to say switch, but get them in the mode of promises and proclamations and then get them to keep them? How do you get them started on a journey as you lead by example? What kind of things do you need to get them to go, oh yeah, I need to make and keep promises and I need to do it every day? I would imagine that again, that's not something that I'm guessing that's not like a 30-minute meeting. Okay, boom, go make promises and proclamations. How do
Right.
you get other people around you to adopt that strategy?
Yeah, that's a promise culture that needs to be integrated. And that's not to say goals aren't still there. Of course they are. But to have weekly meetings with the people that you surround yourself with is important, if not even a daily check-in until people are on board with that. And if they don't see that you're doing the same thing that you're talking about and expecting of them, then it's over, right? So if they know that you're not the one that's going to be there fulfilling and keeping those promises, then yeah, you've got a problem. So whether it's in Slack, emails, text, phone calls, showing up, saying, "Hey, how did it go? What's going on? What's the problem? How come this didn't happen?" Yeah, accountability is really what it comes down to, and trust. And so, can I trust that what you say you're going to do, you're going to do? Can I expect it of you? Awesome. And then when they over deliver, oh my goodness, overly praise. I mean, I'm praising these guys every single second, whether it's a great job on the phone call, you did awesome with your 5-second summary, or you did great with your 2-minute presentation to that person. I mean, I'm praising every second possible because we don't get enough of it. We don't share enough, and we need to make sure that those affirmations are coming through for each other.
Well, once to continue that, once you're going, how often should you evaluate, maybe reevaluate? As it's, do you reach a point where the core is I'm going to spread joy every day, and it stays there, and you keep the promises going as the weeks and the months and the years go, or is it once a year? Is there a time frame? When do you evaluate, reevaluate? Maybe it's time to. Do you update the promises, or do you keep them for a certain amount of time?
Yeah, those are cool questions too. I mean, for me personally, finding that my promise is joy, spreading joy around the world, that's just something that's going to remain constant for me, and that becomes simple then. But then there might be a word that you'll choose for a month, say persistence, or we're going to create more content this month. I mean, there are certain things that you could say, this is the theme for the month. Let's keep the promise around this. Or I also like when I teach people the ICM process, I say, so the ICM process is to really identify, clarify, and magnify your signature moves. And your signature moves are just what make you stand out in this world. And I say it's what makes you stand out in a sit down world. So, like, for example, if there's a musical artist, so if you went to their show, Billy Joel, let's say, here's a piano, Billy behind me, Billy Joel, you go to his concert and he doesn't play the piano man. That's essentially a broken promise to an audience expecting to hear it, right? That's
Mm.
his signature song, his signature voice, signature that you want to hear. I believe that every performer has a signature move, just like Michael Jackson's moonwalk, or any of these famous legends that have the Elvis Presley had the hip swivel and the lip thing he did. And so, what is your signature move as a leader, and how can you identify, clarify, and magnify that? Identify is just by saying, "Here are my talents and my gifts and my skills. I identify for me." But now, Mark, you and I don't know each other other than we just met before this call, which is awesome from a friend. And so if I were to say to you, "Hey, Mark, clarify for me what you think my talents and gifts are," that might be a little bit harder for you than somebody, that we know each other well, where I could say, "Hey, these are some things you do good and well." And then you can take that list that you've identified for yourself, others have clarified for you, now magnify. So I would then lead back to your original question, which was, how do you do some evaluations? How do you make sure that the promise is either something you do every single day, month, or year? I actually have taken it with some of my employees and I said, what are the gifts you identified and are on your clarify list too? That you could take one of those words and say, I'm going to focus on that word this month or this very week. And so maybe one of their words is creativity. I'll say, I want you to focus on being as creative as possible this week in order to move marketing forward in our company. It's interesting what happens when I give them permission to do that, because then they're thinking to themselves, I am a creative person. Well, how can I put on my creative hat? And then sometimes after our evaluation, because we either have a one-on-one weekly or or we do it every day until things stick. After a week, I might say, how did it go with the creativity thing? And then they're like, wow, I put this new email campaign together. I think we've got some branding shifts we're going to do. And I go, okay, now look at another word. If you want to get off creativity, let's talk about persistence for a second. How can you be more persistent in getting some of these other things done that we need? And then we're integrating all of these gifts and skills that are their signature moves so that then they feel like they don't care how much they're getting paid. They wouldn't even care for a raise. In essence, their raise was the chance that they got to share their talents and use them at the highest level. And to me, that's the ultimate leadership promise.
We've covered a lot of ground in a relatively short period of time. When it comes to creating, designing, living, and then sharing your leadership promise, whether it's reinforcing something you said or maybe touching on something that we haven't touched on yet, if someone's listening, watching, like, okay, that's cool, there's a lot of good stuff here. If you were to say, if you're going to make a leadership promise to keep and a proclamation, at least do this one thing, at least do this, what would you tell people to do?
Write it down.
Nice.
That's it. Because you know what? The reason we break promises mostly is because we forget them. We forget that we made them. You just have to write it down. Just like a New Year's resolution, those usually fall apart after a few weeks. And that's why I like to say, that whole why set a goal and you can make a promise. Because if you write down a promise and you say, I'm going to do this, and I'm looking at it and I'm saying to myself, I'm not going to miss it. And I'm not going to forget about it. This is something that drives me. That's the secret.
So if people want to find you online, where the best place or places to go?
Well, I have jasonhewlett.com, and Hewlett is spelled like Hewlett Packard. So if they go to jasonhewlett.com, they'll find essentially the whole library of what I do, or catalog. I'm an entertainer for the top events in the world in terms of a one-man show of music and comedy that's family friendly but Las Vegas quality, a very small niche. And then I also do keynote speaking on leadership, mixing in the music and comedy, which is nobody else does what I'm doing in terms of adding impressions in to teach leaders to find their voice. It's very fun. Written a book called The Promise to the One. You can find that on Amazon. I've also got an Audible where I read it and share it myself and perform it. So that's a fun one. And then, I'm also the president of a company called Cardio Miracle. So Cardio Miracle is the leading supplement for blood flow and cardiovascular issues. And so people that are having health issues can go there. So yeah, there's a lot going on, man, but I appreciate you having me on. This is awesome. And I look forward to more conversation with you.
This has been awesome. Thank you. I appreciate you, Jason.
Thank you.
And scene. Go ahead.
Nice.